Well, welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is our inaugural meeting of the Property, Highways and Transport Select Committee. My name is Councillor Keith Burrows and I'm the chairman of this meeting. Details of business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room if people were here, and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Just some housekeeping for those attending. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, so if the fire alarm does go off, follow our officers to the fire exits and out of the building designated meeting points. And for those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. I would just like to go around the room first so that those that are watching on YouTube know the councillors that are in attendance for this meeting. I would also like to say that when we do speak at the meeting, please make sure you put your microphone on, otherwise the camera will not swing towards you and people will not see you speaking. So I will start with the person to my immediate right. If you'd just like to introduce yourselves and we go around the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Alan Chapman.
Councillor Shahriar Ahmed Wallana.
Councillor Peter Smallwood, substituting for Councillor Adam Bennett.
Okay. Councillor Elizabeth Garlick.
Councillor Kamal Kaur.
Councillor Peter Money. I'm Mark Braddock, I'm the Senior Democratic Services Manager.
I'm Steve Clark, the Democratic Services Officer for this committee.
I'd like to welcome all the new councillors onto the committee, those that were just recently elected, and also those that have stood in the past who make up the other half of this committee. I think we're going to have an interesting time now that the portfolios have been aligned, so I'm really looking forward to it. Can we have apologies for absence? I know that one has already been given as we went round the room. Thank you.
Yes, just to confirm that Councillor Bennett has given his apologies with Councillor Smallwood substituting.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest before us this evening on the business? No? Thank you. Agenda item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting. Well, the previous meeting obviously was held in the Civic Centre and in the Council Chamber, and that was where we elected me as Chairman and Councillor Chapman as Vice Chairman. So are those agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to confirm that the items of business this evening marked as Part 1 be considered in public, items marked Part 2 be considered in private. All items on our agenda this evening are Part 1s, so they will all be considered in public. Now I'm pleased this evening to invite to do a presentation to us, Mark Braddock, who's going to do an introduction to overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon, a broad overview. This will be interesting especially for the new councillors and for those that have stood before, because obviously the way we now make up the select committees and their roles have changed to how we used to do scrutiny before, and it's developed over the past year or so. So I'd like to hand over to Mark Braddock.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's good to see you, councillors, particularly the newly elected ones as well, so welcome. And as Councillor Burrows said, presentations aimed really at new councillors, but also those councillors that were re-elected in terms of a useful refresher. I'm going to go through those headings you can see there, and I've given you copies also on your desk, which you can refer to either during this meeting or later. I'm going to go through those topics about the purpose and role of overview and scrutiny, how select committees and how this one works, scrutiny call-in process, which I'll come on to later, and I'm going to skip that fourth one, effective policy reviews, because we're going to go into a lot more detail about how policy reviews are undertaken at the July meeting, but you've got that information in front of you if you want to read that. And then just some scrutiny essentials at the end, some do's and don'ts and things like that, just to sort of give you a good overview. As well as my job in democratic services, I'm also the council's statutory scrutiny officer, and each council is required to have one in post. And my role and discharge effectively through my team is to promote overview and scrutiny across the authority and beyond, and also provide you as councillors on committees with guidance and support that you need. And what I'd stress before I start, overview and scrutiny is really interesting. It's where you as councillors can make a difference. As ward councillors, you can add real value to decision making. You can apply, and I think you do see this a lot. Councillors apply their local knowledge and insight into, and their other experiences in life in terms of how you conduct your business here, and ultimately to improve services to residents. So you can really make a difference in overview and scrutiny, and over the years, overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon has made a difference in a number of areas. So no, it's an interesting committees to be on. So I'm sure you'll have a good year ahead on this committee. Right. Let's go through. What I thought I'd start off with is our governance structure. This is how the council is structured politically, if you like, at the top level, and you're pretty familiar with most of this. But you've got all the councillors in the full council, which you met the other day, in the centre. You've got the executive, the blue at the top. That's the cabinet leader that run the council in terms of day-to-day decision making, strategic decision making. They're the executive, really. And then on the left, you've got the green sort of quasi-judicial committees, regulatory committees like licensing committees, planning committees, and others. At the bottom, you've got more your partnership bodies, Health and Wellbeing Board, which works with our NHS partners and health partners, outside bodies, and other things like the DV, domestic abuse executive, and things like that. But on the right, in red, are the select committees, and they're the key check and balance, if you like, on the executive, but also have a key role in other areas which we'll come on to. So that's where select committees fit. It's an integral part of the council's governance. And in a nutshell, and this is pretty basic stuff, so do excuse me, but I like to show this to managers and other staff when they start in the council, just to get a flavour. We all know how most people know how national politics work. A lot of people don't know how local sort of governance works. So you have Her Majesty, who we all know, as our sovereign. Locally, our equivalent, to a degree, is our mayor. You've got the legislature, that's just the House of Commons there, but we've got a bicameral system nationally. But we've got the full council, that's all of you meeting there. Then we have the cabinet nationally, and we have Hillingdon's cabinet, as you know. And then in Parliament, there are select committees that hold the government to account and undertake reviews and write reports. And we have our select committees like this one here. And then supporting them are nationally, the civil service, and locally, local government officers in Hillingdon. So that just gives you a picture overview of how select committees fit in. Just briefly on the law around overview and scrutiny. The law requires committees such as this to assist in the development of council policy, question and evaluate the actions of the cabinet before and after decisions are made, and by doing all that, you have the power to submit reports to the cabinet on such matters where you might want to change things, or you found something you might want to report. Committees must also there's a requirement for committees to hold health providers to account. That's a statutory requirement, such as the NHS, but there are others. And one committee must also act as a statutory crime and disorder committee to scrutinise what we call the Safe for Hillingdon Partnership, which includes agencies like the police. And you'll be familiar with this. The select committee structure has been very neatly aligned with cabinet portfolios. So you know which cabinet member you relate to in terms of your select committee, and although it's not on this chart, the directorates, the officers supporting you are very neatly aligned to that as well. What are your sort of duties as councillors on a select committee? Well, you're here to challenge, scrutinise and monitor local services and issues in your remit, act as a statutory check and balance on the cabinet, be constructive, a critical friend to the cabinet when required, propose and drive improvement to services. You're here, to look at ways in which you can improve things for residents. And this is critical. You use your local knowledge and insight. You've got probably a lot after the elections where you've been out campaigning and speaking to residents across the board, a lot of insight into what the local issues are, and use this to amplify the voice and concerns of residents in general. You have some powers though in select committees. You have the call-in power, which I'll come on to later. You have the power to send a report to the Cabinet and the Council in certain cases. You have the power to require the attendance of a senior officer of the Council, compel them to attend, similar to a summons. But we don't really use that very often in Hillingdon, not for a long time, because officers are very willing to come along and give you evidence and speak to you. You have the power to request certain information, and for the Health and Social Care Committee, not this one, they have the power to refer certain things, certain substantial health changes in certain circumstances to the Secretary of State. But you don't have any decision-making powers as a committee. You're not an executive body. You can only make recommendations. So before 2021, we had a whole range of different sort of overview and scrutiny committees which had different roles. We had one committee that just had the scrutiny role, or the executive scrutiny role, and others that were called policy overview committees in those days. So we had 3 different roles which different committees exercised. But now we've combined those 3 roles there, scrutiny, policy review and overview, into all select committees. So you undertake all those combined roles. And I'll come on to each of those very briefly later. I thought I'd start just by going through the remit of this select committee that the full council has agreed. You're here to undertake the overview and scrutiny role in relation to the Cabinet Member, Councillor Bianco, Cabinet Member for Properties, Highways and Transport. And you've got the following service areas which fall under his brief: property and estates, that's a big area. Capital programme, there's some big projects the council's doing, such as the Hillingdon Outdoor Leisure Centre, the school building programme, leisure centres, the works, civic centre. There's some big projects there that you'll want to be kept abreast of. Transportation, that's a very big area. That's not just the usual stuff. That's even our aviation team we've got, and our all the different forms of transport you can imagine kind of that. And we've got highways. Repairs and engineering, that's a big area. That's the housing repairs service, as well as repairs to other corporate buildings. And then you've got building safety, which is an emergingly important area because of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. We've got a building safety strategy coming to Cabinet next week, which you may wish as a committee to monitor and to see how that's going on later on, but I'll leave that to you. And additionally, Council's giving you the unique, I think we're relatively unique, we can't be relatively unique, but we're quite lucky, I think, compared to some other councils where we've actually been able to scrutinise external utility companies in the past. There's no requirement for us to do that, and there's no statutory requirement for us to call in broadband providers or 5G providers or water companies, but we have in the past brought them in where there have been local issues. Post office being in, I recall, I think the broadband open reach has been in, just to update councillors on things. So that's useful. And also you've got a number of cross-cutting topics, such as the civic centre, property and built assets generally across the borough. So you've got quite a big remit, a lot of stuff to get into. The way you do all this then is this is how you work through your multi-year work programme, which is on later on your agenda. It's a first draft. It will develop, shape, grow over time. It sets out all your activity at each meetings and allows you to plan ahead. It's multi-year, so you don't have a deadline of the end of the municipal year to get things done. All I would say really, and Steve will reiterate this at meetings going forward, keep it manageable, balance it out, spread it around. You don't want to be having meetings where you might be here till 9, 10 o'clock at one night and then just here for half an hour another night. So you've got to manage those. And it can get quite complex where you've got witness sessions and things like that. So, but it's your work programme. It's steered obviously by the chairman, but it's your work programme. It gets shaped here at the committee, each meeting. So going back to those 3 roles, scrutiny role. There's 4 aspects to this. Pre-decision scrutiny. This is where you can monitor, and you've got it on the agenda, the Cabinet's forward plan. That's where the Cabinet sets out expected decisions to be taken over the coming months and year. And there may be opportunities for you to give official comments on those reports to Cabinet before, so Cabinet can look at your comments before it makes a decision. Not all cases, but there may be a report, for example, the Cabinet member is happy to bring to this committee as draft before it goes to Cabinet. Or it could be that you've really looked into this issue for a long time, and you, as a committee, you're very knowledgeable about it, and you wish to, because you see it coming later, you wish to just at least send some comments down. But you need to have that knowledge and information to be able to send comments. You just can't send any comments. It's got to be related to the matter in hand. Post-decision scrutiny. We haven't, to be fair, done much of this over recent years, but it is a useful thing. There may be, for example, a policy or initiative or scheme that has been approved by the Cabinet, and you might think, well, as a committee, let's in a year or 6 months' time, let's go review and see how well it's done or how it's been implemented. So that's that post-decision scrutiny. Number 3, I keep saying I'll come back to this, and I will again in a minute, but this is the scrutiny call-in procedure. This is where you can call in a Cabinet or Cabinet member decision just as it's been made by the Cabinet or the Cabinet member within the 5 days or 5 clear working days of it being made. And finally, scrutiny of external partners, which I've touched on, but this committee really, its focus is on utilities. Policy review. So this is where you can help make a difference in terms of council's policies. You have your committee-owned policies, those that committee-owned policy reviews. They're the ones where you select a topic and you do spend a bit of time undertaking an in-depth review. It's one of your primary activities where you might have multiple witness sessions or just 1 or 2, and you build up a lot of evidence and information, and you may over time develop some findings and find that things might need to be changed or improvements could be required here, and you then make your recommendations to the Cabinet. It's one of the key areas of committee activity, and we can focus more on that at the June meeting. Past policy reviews. Again, you may want to look at past reviews that you, as the committee, maybe not all the councillors here, but this committee last year finalised a very strategic, important review for the council on electrical vehicle infrastructure across the borough and future policy direction. So we can make sure, Steve, I don't know if Steve wants to make sure we circulate that round to the new members in particular, but at some point your committee will want to review those recommendations. It went to Cabinet, Cabinet approved it, but you'll want to see how they're being implemented now. 3, policy shaping. This is where, and it's not an automatic right, but where the Cabinet member may say, I've got a policy coming up in a few months' time on the forward plan. In fact, we've got one case coming up in the education sphere, actually, where there's a school-related policy coming up. And the Cabinet member is quite keen for it to go to the Select Committee before it comes to the Cabinet for their input, their feedback and their insight. And then finally, you have these policy framework decisions where there are certain strategies, the most high-level ones in the council, like our strategic housing strategy, the council strategy, which is coming up soon, and other ones where by law they're required to go to the relevant Select Committee for input as part of that consultation process before they come back to council, a Cabinet, and onto the full council ultimately. They're documents that have to be approved by the full council because they set the overarching framework of policy across the authority. So you've got a big role in policy. And finally, overview. This is more about monitoring services, monitoring performance of services, and topical matters where you might want to receive an information report, and obviously budget monitoring. You get the opportunity to review the budget twice a year. Going on to this scrutiny call-in, which I mentioned then, I thought I'd just quickly run through this before we get to the last section of this presentation. This is ultimately the ultimate check and balance, the right to delay a Cabinet or Cabinet member decision which has been made to allow you as a committee to consider the decision. Now, guidance does say it should be used exceptionally and where you as councillors want to intervene because you feel a decision has been made by the Cabinet or the Cabinet member that needs to be revisited or possibly changed. We have, and you'll get notified, a lot of decisions made daily by Cabinet members, and you get the email alerts when they've made decisions, and you get the decision notice in that email, which tells you, all the details and the date by which, if one were to call that in on an exceptional basis, you should do that. And and when Cabinet meets, the day after Cabinet, the Cabinet decisions are issued, and you'll get notice of that. But the way we do it is we do it via an automated online app, which I think this is unique across councils, and it's done outside committee meetings by the relevant select committee members only. So what happens is, I'm going to show you this, and I'll go through some very quick slides to show you what it looks like. So let's for the sake of it, say the Cabinet's made a decision that one of you, and it relates to the property, your remit, property, transport, highways, that one of you thinks, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. I think this is the wrong policy. It could be not the right time to do it. There's no guidance really I can give you about why you might not think it's right, and sometimes, to be frank, it can be used politically. But I would, encourage select committee members that select committees are not really supposed to be political forums. But there's no guidance on why you can't call something in. So you see something, and you get the minutes of the Cabinet meeting, and you then click on the link on there, and you'll be, hopefully, if we've got it sorted out on your computers, you'll get sent to the app, and you can type in your details of why you think this decision's not right. You put your name in, put the committee you're on, and the date the Cabinet member made the decision. So you're just quickly filling a few forms in, and once you've done that, you press submit, and an automatic email goes out to all councillors. So let's have a look. So you go to the app. That's the app. New call-in request. You fill the app in about this Cabinet decision that you're not particularly happy with for whatever reason, and you press submit at the bottom, and you can attach other files if you want as well. And then an email goes out, and that one is to me, but that's a test one. It goes out to all members of this committee, and they say Councillor X has made submitted a call-in request on this matter, and you get to see the details. You can then, as a councillor, you can decide, you don't have to, but you can decide if you want to click on the link in the email, and you come to this part of the app, and it'll have your names on it as councillors, and alongside it you can say whether you approve that call-in request or you reject it, and you can give comments as well, and then you press submit. And then a running total is kept, and these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 6 test call-ins from when we set this system up. But we had 3 call-ins three call-in requests last year, and you can see the tally, the votes there, if you like, for or against it. When the magic number 4 is reached on this committee, that's a majority. When 4 councillors have said we agree with that call-in request that a councillor's made, it then becomes a valid call-in, and Democratic Services get alerted immediately. That Cabinet decision is completely put on hold, can't be implemented, and then we convene a special meeting of this committee to discuss the matter further, possibly call the Cabinet member in and the officers to ask them questions, why they want to do this policy, what's their rationale, and then you can decide whether, the Cabinet, they make a very good case, and we're going to, as a committee, agree that. That's fine, the policy that then can be implemented. But you might say, no, Cabinet, go and have another look at it. So you can then send it back to the Cabinet, and they have to meet and have another look at it. So it's a way of exercising influence on decisions that have just been made. Now, I'm going to be sending out after this meeting guidance to you on how to use the app and access the app, but it's pretty easy. We have 3 requests last year used by councillors. Any issues with it, you can just contact Democratic Services. I'm going to skip over these now because we'll focus on policy reviews at the next meeting. And final couple of slides. Just some tips really, and they're outlined slightly in your reports that I've circulated on the agenda. But I would like to just stress the importance of your clerk, Steve, for this meeting in terms of there's so much more obviously than just taking minutes. I mean, Steve is your go-to guy for the committee. He's here to advise all committee members, chairman in particular, obviously. But Steve also will undertake research for the committee. He'll commission work. He'll commission information that you as committee need as part of your scrutiny activities. Oversee all support to the committee and also write the reports that the committee wishes to send to the cabinet as well. So really a central role supporting your committee. The clerk is. I put in your report chapter 6 of the council's constitution. That is your rule book, so you can have that as reference. But that's how overview and scrutiny works in Hillingdon. And at the back of that, there's a very interesting protocol on scrutiny and cabinet relations, and that was something that we were advised by government to bring in under statutory guidance a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, which sets out how overview and scrutiny committees or select committees and cabinet members should work well constructively together. What cabinet members should do, what select committees should do, so you can have a constructive, effective relationship. It's very important when you do reviews, for example, the last thing you really want is to go away and do a big review into a subject and not involve the cabinet member at different stages and keep them up to date. And when it comes to cabinet, it's a no-go. Do you know what I mean? You've not really achieved anything then. So it's really important to have that constructive relationship with cabinet members. One of the things councillors do ask on a regular basis is what information can they get on overview and scrutiny committees, or what can they get on these select committees? And just quickly summarising it, but we're always here to give you further advice as your committee progresses. There's no automatic right, for example, to cabinet papers or cabinet member papers in draft form before Democratic Services publish them. So if you see something on the forward plan in September, say, well, firstly, that report won't be ready now, but there's no automatic right to see that before it's published, unless the cabinet member agrees, which does happen, which can happen. You do have a right to access information, and a lot of information, if it's reasonable, in relation to the scrutiny work that you're doing as a committee. So if you're doing a review into a particular service area, it's within your right as a committee to ask for information to support that review, as long as it's reasonable. Requests should be made via the committee here at the meeting, so you can all agree that's something you want. I think that's quite important, rather than approach Steve as the clerk outside. It's important that all requests are made at the committee. And quite often what we do is, given the committee only meets once a month, if we do get some information, Steve might ping it round to you by email, just so you've got it in a more timely way, rather than wait till the next meeting. When you get officers attending meetings and witnesses, I think this is pretty obvious really. No grilling up at here, but I know none of you will do that. But officers do attend, and councillors do ask sometimes rightly in-depth questions and pointed questions, because they want to get to the nub of the issue. Absolutely fine to do that. It's just really to remember that officers are here, and when asking questions, try and do it in a fair and balanced way as possible. But I don't think we have had any issues with that here in Hillingdon. We have a very good relationship with councillors and officers. Final slide for me, so I can stop talking and you can ask any questions you have, is just some do's and don'ts as a select committee. Do try to reach consensus, be constructive and work with opposition group members, because you're all one committee. Challenge officers, challenge information that you get. Ask for that evidence that you might need for doing your review, and Steve can help you with that. And you have a lot of armour at your disposal. I mean, within reason, the select committees can commission surveys to get data in terms of the topics it's doing. It can, if available, get subject matter experts to attend committees. So you have a lot of information that you can get to support your reviews. Definitely something I would suggest councillors, when you get to those policy reviews and you've got your witnesses, do get your questions lined up, prepared in advance, which I know some of you do. Some key don'ts: have votes. It's very rare we have votes. I think chairman, isn't it, from memory in select committees? Very rare. It's more or less something you all generally agree, but clearly there is the ability to vote on a matter at the committee if you feel you need to. Again, the second one, be political. In my experience, select committees have always been non-political. There may be the odd one or two times, but generally non-political here. Not confrontational, obviously. Don't make assumptions. Last one, focus on individual complaints or concern. Don't focus on individuals. So one key thing I would just leave you with, you have a lot of insight from residents, a lot of contact with residents daily through your members' inquiries. It's clearly not right to talk about that individual complaint and particularly that person in meetings, but you could use that as an anecdotal thing about an issue you're looking at, or it could be that you've had a few complaints about that and it's fine to raise the fact that you've had complaints about these issues, but just not on that individual complaint with that particular resident concerned. I'm going to leave it there, councillors, and happy to take any questions, and clearly over the coming year, Steve can answer any questions as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a quick whiz through, obviously, our role, but very in-depth. Can I just confirm one thing, though? You said Chapter 6, and your slide pack you gave us says Chapter 5.
Yeah, it is I can confirm it's Chapter 6.
Chapter 6, yeah.
Well, it's remodelling the Constitution.
That's right.
I had a lot of chapters to go through.
It got moved along. Yeah, it did. Yeah. Okay, and just to reiterate a couple of points. I've been fortunate enough to have Steve as my clerk for the last committee that I was chairman of. And Steve has so much knowledge. He will come to us with research. He did an awful lot of research for us on the electric vehicles and charging points. He set up our witnesses. He set the timings. He got everything right for us. But there's a good point that Mark made. Don't bombard him just with your own personal question or your own personal bit of evidence you want. It should be done through the committee so that the committee knows what Steve's going to bring forward for us. Because there's nothing worse than the fact that Steve phoned me and say, I've just been requested for X, Y, Z. And as chairman, I knew nothing about it. And then, of course, I've got to either be non-political and say, OK, go ahead with it this time and we'll mention it at the meeting. Or if I don't think it's relevant, I can rule it out. But we must go for that. Mark also mentioned the electric vehicles and the report we done. That is important that we review it again as a committee, for the simple reason being that report had short, medium and long-term targets put in there. So we will be, over this year and going into next year, we will be looking at where we are with those different targets in those levels. So that will be something that we can still continue to monitor. And that gets back to Mark's point that as a committee, although we're moving forward with new topics, we will be reviewing topics that are already on the agenda. That's enough for me. Any questions from councillors? No, we're all happy. Well, thank you, Mark, for attending this evening and putting this together for us. It is good that we have something like this, because then we end up with all our select committees all singing off the same hymn sheet and putting forward good reports and challenging where we have to challenge. So thank you, Mark, for your insight this evening.
Thank you, Chairman.
So we now move on to the Cabinet Forward Plan. And Steve wants to come in because I can see the bit of paper that's on my desk here and you've all got it as well.
So as you can see in front of you, since the agenda for tonight was published, the July version of the forward plan was published. There are 4 new items on there. You've got them in front of you for your consideration.
Thank you, Steve. I'm sure you've all read the green papers here with upcoming decisions, etc. There are quite a few decisions going to be made over the coming weeks and months. And I would just like to point out, Mark mentioned major projects that are being built across the borough. as the select committee, yes, we can look at those, and we can look at their progress, etc., etc. But I think it's important to go back to the point that Mark made. There are certain things that we can't say, well, actually, you should be doing that. We want that change. We want that change. So although we can watch those major projects and ensure that we're progressing as we should, we need to be careful on some of those. But there's certainly some stuff coming through Councillor Bianco's portfolio. I think it's much better now that it is aligned to the one cabinet member, and we can move forward on that. Has anybody got any comments on the upcoming decisions on the forward plan? Councillor Money.
Thank you. Just on the building safety strategy, quite an important issue, nationally because of Grenfell and now locally. I think maybe have this as a monitoring report going forward, just to see the progress. I know that in Hayes we've got High Point Village, and I think it will be important and good to have an update on this quite frequently. I hope everyone agrees.
Yeah, I agree with that, because obviously resident safety across the whole borough is paramount to all councillors and the council as a whole. So yeah, moving forward, once that's gone through, we certainly will get the regular updates, and I'm sure that Steve will build that within our programme so that we get that as it's going forward. Any other comments? Councillor Cole?
I was looking at these, and there are various supply contracts that are going out, and the terms of contracts have been for a period of 3 years with options to extend for further 2 years, subject to requirement of service and performance of the contractors. I was wondering if it could be 2 years plus 3 years, because if we are reviewing their performance and if they are not up to the mark, would it not be more sensible to save another year of taxpayers' money? It will still be 5 years, but it would be 2 years and review after 2 years and then extend to 3 years.
I think the actual wording, and Mark will correct me if I get this wrong now, I think the actual wording of the contracts and the decision on the length of those contracts and how they pan out is down to the cabinet members and the cabinet as a whole, because it's gone through a tender process and it's gone through that process. We can monitor it, we can monitor the contract, but I don't think we can actually feed into what cabinet should say should be in that tender process for that contract. Am I right, Mark?
Yes, Tim. So procurement of goods and services by the council goes a thorough process in terms of trying to get best value. So each service being procured could have a different time length in terms of that contract. You know, the leisure centre contracts are for multiple years, I think 10, 15 years, something like that, for understandable reasons, whereas maybe some building work contracts might just be for a few years. So it depends on the service being procured, and like you say, what is always built in is that contract extension where it's not automatic. Should the performance of the contractor after the 2 year or 3 year first contract fail, then that extension has to be reapproved by the cabinet member formally through the democratic process. So there is that check and balance on that, and you'll see those reports come through where a contract is being extended, and it will say why it's being extended, usually because the performance of the contractor has been satisfactory. So it depends on the service, and the time span for those contracts really depend on the service procured. So I'm happy to go and get you more information if there's something specific you want to.
No, basically, I was just thinking, because we are going to review anyway, so why not review after 2 years rather than 3 years? The contract for 5 years, for example, this is repair of fencing and gating, and then asbestos removal service contract. If we were going to review them, why not review them after 2 years and then extend for 3 years?
Each contract, all I'd say, Councillor, is each contract's different, and there are officers reviewing these contracts on a regular basis, and it would be absolutely fine for a committee if for example, that roofing repairs contract, there's issues, and you've noticed that as all councillors, there's issues going on after the first 2 years, for you to ask officers to come in and explain what's going on with that contract. Absolutely, you can do that. But when the council enters into contracts, it enters in for a defined period of time, based upon the circumstances at that time with the market and other situations, depending on best value really for the taxpayers. So each service being procured is different, but absolutely this committee, and this is one of the findings from the statutory scrutiny guidance issued, that select committees really have a role in following that council pound down to how the contractors are performing, particularly after Grenfell Towers. How are the contractors performing that are doing services to our housing stock and things like that? So you do have a role where things are failing as a select committee to query and question that.
Any other questions? No? So can we take that we note the forward plan with those questions that were originally asked? Agreed? Okay, then we come on to agenda item 7, which is Property, Highways and Transport Select Committee Work Programme. Apologies for the July meeting being moved. That was at my request. So it will be now the 13th of July. An email has already been circulated by Steve. So if we look at our multi-year work programme, Steve just wants to come in now and just bring us up to date on the work programme itself.
So as you heard earlier, this work programme is a liquid document essentially. It will be subject to change and items will move. A couple of things have moved. So you've got the mid-year budget/budget planning report that comes to the committee, or the budget comes to the committee twice a year. It's listed for July in the one in front of you. It will be coming to the committee in September. That item comes to all of the select committees. Finance have agreed to move that item to September. And there's an additional item in the one-off monitoring or update reports. Oh, actually, Councillor Money mentioned earlier the building safety strategy. I'll work on that and make sure I can add that to our monitoring and put that in the work programme. But also the council strategy for 2022 to 2026. There'll be a consultation with the select committees. Again, all of the select committees. That will potentially be coming to the select committee at our next meeting in July. Yet to be set in stone, but that may be coming soon. So that's an additional item.
Thanks, Steve. And if we look at our multi-year work programme, obviously we mentioned the electric vehicle infrastructure earlier. If you follow that programme across, we're not due to see that until 6th of April 23. Now, I don't know how anybody else feels about this, but I'd rather see it around about November time with a follow-up in April, for the simple reason being, I know that we had short, medium and long-term targets in there, and I know that some of the short-term were already being developed and implemented. So I'd rather see a report coming to us in November's meeting, which is 16th of November, and then we take it again at the April, just to see what progress has come. I don't know how other select committee members feel about that. Any comments? Or are you happy that we request it in November? Yeah. Can we request that?
Yeah, I'll speak to officers.
Yeah, thank you. Because as I say, it's still a few months off. Are there any other comments on our work programme at this stage?
Chairman,
No?
Chairman, do you want to mention site visits, or was that later?
Mention?
Site visits?
You can go for site visits. No, I'll leave you down for site visits.
Well, I would just say, I mean, we don't be as a committee, you'll want to be getting out there, particularly with your remit, buildings, if you like. A large part of it is buildings and infrastructure. Then there'll be things you might wish to see. And in particular, we was having a discussion with the chairman the other day, and one of your remits, your cross-cutting remits, is the civic centre project, if you like, in terms of the work that we've already done in the civic centre, but planned work to refurbish the building and do some interesting, innovative things here. So That could be a potential site visit tour with yourselves at a suitable time outside the committee meeting where you go around with officers and visit and see things. But there may be other suggestions as well which you might have. So that was all, and we can add that to the work programme.
It will be a good idea. How many people, I know we've got newly elected councillors here, but for those that have already been councillors for a number of years, how many people have probably been to near enough every part of this civic centre? You know, I've been a councillor now for 20 years, and there's probably parts of this civic centre I don't even know exists. And sometimes I've found parts of it by total accident, and then I have to find my way back. So I think it will be a good idea, especially how we're moving services into the civic centre and reconfiguring it itself as well. And also, how's that going to work for our residents and things like that? So that will be a good idea. And there will be other places that we can go and visit. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was going to say, I mean, I've been a councillor 8 years, and I do have a tendency to, shall we say, wander around and explore. And I've often got to places and thought, you know, I wonder what they do here exactly, sort of thing. And so I think there's a lot of merit in it. I mean, you've got a building that's pushing 50 years old now. It's changed a hell of a lot. So it would be interesting to know not just what the future plan is, but what the reality on the ground is of what's going on exactly. It is, if you like, the biggest bit of real estate the council's got, so it'd be a good starting point.
And also not to forget that it was actually in the James Bond film as well. Some of you are probably too young to remember that. But I do. It was the council chamber that they used. Any other comments on the work programme at this stage? No? Are we happy with that work programme going forward? As Steve's mentioned already, and I found this when I was chairman of the previous select committee, that work programme does change quite rapidly. And there's various reasons for that. Sometimes there's been some sort of hold up from the cabinet member, and therefore officers have been looking at something else, so that report can't come to us till a later meeting, therefore we slot something else in. So it is very fluid, and it does change quite a lot. So with the work programme looked at and everything else, and from our presentation from Mark Braddock, again Mark, thank you very much for attending this evening. I thank all of you as well for your attendance this evening. I'm sure that moving forward we're going to find some very good topics to look at and get our teeth into, because the remit within this select committee is huge. So thank you once again, and for those watching on YouTube, thank you very much, and thank you Steve as well for minuting this evening. Thank you, and I wish you all good evening.